Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second SSP webinar of 2020. You are joining us for the most timely webinar to date, titled Getting Users to the Content. I'm Jeff Lang with the American Chemical Society, and I'll be your host for today. We're pleased that you could join us. In a moment, we'll get you started hearing from our moderator and our panelists. You'll be seeing this SSP splash screen as we get started here. And in a moment, your phones will continue to be muted and out of consideration for our presenters and fellow panelists. Please use the questions feature to send your questions in, or if you need to let us know that you're having technical difficulties. The moderator will review your questions and present them to the panelists. To help him, please specify to which presenter you'd like your question directed. Also, please send in your questions as we go. They'll be addressed after the initial discussions. At the conclusion of today's session, you'll receive a webinar evaluation via email. We encourage you to provide feedback so that we can continually improve the SSP webinar program. Our moderator today is Tom Beyer, who's the Director of Platform Services at Sheridan Pub Factory. Tom is responsible for charting the direction of the Pub Factory platform and working with clients and prospects on how best to make use of the platform's features. Tom has been involved in building online solutions for publishers for over 20 years. Now I'll turn the webinar over to Tom so that he can introduce the panel and get us started.
Hi, everybody. I got interested in organizing this webinar because there have been a number of announcements around the topic of content discovery that really seemed worth exploring. And I think we've got a really interesting set of panelists today that are coming at it, getting users to the content and from one piece of content to another in a number of different and interesting ways. So we'll be starting today with Laird Barrett, who is the Senior Digital Product Manager at Springer Nature. He's the product owner of the London-based identity team who provide authentication services to Springer Nature websites like SpringerLink and Nature.com. And he'll be talking in particular because he's also heavily involved in the seamless access and GetFTR initiatives. After Laird, we'll have Patricia Brennan, who's Director of Product and Program at Meta, and currently works, which is of course part of the Chan Zuckerberg initiative. Previously, she held leadership roles at Thomson Reuters IP and Science Division, which is now Clarivate Analytics. She's also active as a coach and advisor to individuals and organizations in honing and growing their product management skills. And finally, we'll hear from Sean Reif, who's Chief Research Officer and one of the co-founders at Cite.ai. And they're doing some very interesting things around categorization of citations. So why don't we kick things off and get started with Laird.
Thank you very much, Tom. If someone could give me the ability to share my screen, that would be much appreciated. Oh, there we go. And I'll just show my screen here, so you should be able to see slides, hopefully, if that's okay. And I'll just put that into presenter mode. Can I just check, Tom or Jeff, can you see those slides okay?
Great.
Perfect, thank you very much. So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. So as Tom mentioned, I'm the product owner for Springer Nature's London-based identity team, and I'm talking to you from London today, which is sunny but very quiet on the streets outside, perhaps unsurprisingly. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about the problem of users gaining access to institutional subscriptions and content on publishers' sites when they are on a device that is not connected to their institutional network and being authenticated via IP, which is increasingly the case. Has been increasingly the case for a while, but it is obviously a timely topic currently as well. And I'm going to talk about a couple of industry initiatives that have been ongoing to try and ease authentication and access to content on publisher sites when users are outside of their institutional networks. So I'll start with the problem. The principal way in which we authenticate a researcher who's a member of an institution to one of our websites like SpringerLink or Nature.com is via IP. So that researcher has to be on a device that's connected to their institutional network. On our side, we see the IP, we've got that on file, and we grant access. It is a wonderful and beautiful and an easy user experience. It's been working less and less well for end users for a little while now, as people increasingly are not on, say, a desktop computer that is sort of maybe in their office on campus, but they're maybe sort of increasingly on the move or in another location and trying to gain access to content on publisher sites. We've also started to see that IP is working less and less well technically. So some institutions, for example, will implement software like Zscaler, a piece of security software that means that they then no longer have a static IP address for their network that we can use to institutionally authenticate their users. And this is an industry-wide problem. We offer methods to for a researcher when they're outside of their institutional network to prove that they're a member of their institution, but often those methods are long and confusing and painful for researchers. So this is the flow for the, or what used to be the flow at least, for what we call federated access on nature.com. You might also know it by, it goes by a number of different names. So you might also know it broadly as single sign-on. You might know it as Shibboleth and Open Athens, which is sort of software as well as sort of it's most simply described as software that underlies the federated access method. You might even know it as SAML-based authentication, which is a more technical term for it. But the journey to use this authentication method is long. You know, a user has to find the prompt on publisher site to initiate the experience, and that's often different across different publisher sites. They've got to select their institution. They're bounced out to their institutional network to put in their credentials, and then they come back authenticated. But they may not be entitled to that piece of content, so they've just gone through this long journey and still not gotten what they wanted. They've got to go through this experience over and over again on publishers, different publishers' sites as they bounce between different publisher sites. Obviously, there are other off-network authentication methods. We might also call them off-campus, and you might have something like proxies, for example. But even those journeys can be quite long and painful for people. So we've certainly seen examples where people find an article they're interested in when they're not connected to their institutional network. They go and try to access that article. They don't have access to it. They go back to their library discovery service and they log in there. They cut and paste the article title and search for the article there. You know, they click on maybe the proxy link to then authenticate to the publisher's site to gain access. And what we've heard from researchers who we've surveyed is that access is the #1 problem on our content delivery sites. And part of that is sometimes because they're not entitled, and Springer Nature is a leader in open access to try and address that issue. But many people also say that it's painful for them to try and get access to paid for content, so institutional subscriptions, and it's one of the top things that we can do to make it easier for researchers to do their work. So this was a survey of I think over 10,000 researchers who use SpringerLink. It's back from 2018, but it's still relevant today. So there are a couple of industry efforts to try and ease this experience for researchers. One of them is something called seamless access. You might know it as well as RA21, or resource access in the 21st century. So RA21 was a group that was trying to come up with a solution to this problem, and they issued a set of a NISO recommendation about how to address this problem. And now seamless access is the group that is actually implementing the services that underlie that solution. And the solution is pretty basic, actually. All it is it's a new user experience over that old federated access method. So if you, as a librarian, for example, you don't enable the seamless access method. You might enable federated access for your users to a publisher site, for example, but the publisher implements the seamless access experience on their site. And if you have federated access enabled, then you'll get the benefit of the seamless access experience. And all that experience over the top of, it's sort of like a skin or a wrapper over the top of federated access, all that experience is it introduces a consistent call to action to initiate the login experience. So this is on nature.com. That's the big blue button that you see up on the right that says access through your institution. And the idea is that by making that call to action consistent across publisher sites, it will be much easier for researchers to find that experience and initiate that experience. And then the second piece of it is that once a user has gone through the federated access experience once on one publisher site, their institutional selection, so not their authentication, but their institutional selection is stored in their local browser storage, so just on their browser in that device and only their institutional selection data. And then when they go to another publisher site who has implemented the seamless access experience, that publisher can pull back that institutional selection and make the experience of authenticating on another publisher's site or re-authenticating on, say, the first publisher's site easier for the user, because we know that they have indicated in the past that they're a member of this institution, and so we can just surface a one-click button to them that says, hey, we know you're University of Oxford, click here. In the background, we do the communication with the institution's identity provider, and then we just authenticate and show the user the download PDF button on that basis. If the user, if their session has expired on their institutional identity provider, then they might need to put their credentials in again. And how often that session expires is really based on the institution. Some people let it run for days and weeks. Some people do it just for hours, but it's really the institution's decision about how long that authentication session is valid. Okay, so that's seamless access. And then there's one other thing that's happening that is separate from seamless access, although sometimes they're confusingly conflated together, and that's GetFTR or Get Full Text Research. And the idea with GetFTR is that the problem it's trying to solve is that researchers use a variety of different discovery tools. So, Google Scholar is a popular one, but people use PubMed, and there's a long list of discovery tools that are used. And if I'm a researcher and I find some content that I'm interested in there, I don't always know whether I'm actually entitled to access that content on a publisher site. And so sometimes I can click through and I can hit a paywall, and then it's just confusing, and it's another confusing and painful experience for me. And so all GetFTR is it's an entitlements API, so that a website like PubMed, for example, when a researcher is on PubMed, they can search for whatever they're interested in. PubMed can make a call to say, hey, participating publishers, we have this user who's interested in accessing these articles. Are they entitled to the articles on your site? And GetFTR will return a response to say, yep, this user is entitled. And we also provide a link through to the publisher's site to come through authenticated when you click on it. At the moment, GetFTR uses that federated access mechanism under the hood. So the link that's returned is what's called a wafeless URL, which initiates the federated access experience. It's currently in a beta phase, so it might not always use only that federated access experience, but that's what we've started with. And so GetFTR is in a beta phase for the first half of this year, where we're testing it out with some integrators to figure out, does it work well for, and when I say integrators, I mean people like PubMed, for example, where we're testing it out to see if it works well for them and works well for their users, and the service will probably evolve from there. It's worth saying just very quickly, and sort of just bounce back, but the status of seamless access is it's also in a beta phase through the first half of this year and maybe longer. Springer Nature is the first publisher to roll out the experience, which we did on nature.com in November, and the ACS, the American Chemical Society, which Jeff is a member of, rolled out the experience, I think, just a few weeks ago now, and we're the first two publishers to have rolled out the experience. That is it. Thank you very much. Shall I hand back over to Tom?
Okay. Thank you so much, Laird. That was a great introduction to seamless access and GetFTR. And now to Patricia to talk about what Meta's up to. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Just confirming everybody can see my screen?
You can.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the opportunity to participate in today's webinar. I'm here in the Bay Area, which is also very quiet, even for early morning. So this morning I'm going to talk about Meta And let me advance the slide. So Meta is a research discovery tool that provides a faster way to understand, organize, and explore science. First, I thought I would give a little introduction to CZI, which is where Meta is housed. CZI is an organization that supports science with a mission to cure, prevent, or manage all diseases by the end of the century. And to do that, it develops tools and technologies and really is about promoting open, collaborative models of research. So some of the approach that CZI takes and where Meta fits into that is, on the one hand, CZI is a philanthropy that funds and gives grants out to researchers and to communities. But it also is an organization that builds tools and creates partnerships and is looking to support the cultural change through creating projects and creating new models of scholarly communication. So Meta is an example of that, and it's an AI-enabled literature discovery platform. So just a little bit about the why. So today, despite the fact that technology is making it much easier for individuals, organizations, or anyone to disseminate scientific information, it's also creating a burden on researchers who, as we know, are still spending more time searching than they are consuming information or applying that information into their work. So our goal is to enable researchers to discover and mine the information and to accelerate their research journey. And manage the volume of literature that requires still a lot of aggregating information, processing email alerts, and sorting through sources of information to really understand what's happening in the area that they're interested in. So to do that, we have three goals or three prongs. One is around understanding the literature. And so we use some machine learning tools to analyze, connect, and cluster data as it's coming through. We organize that information. We do that through something that we call feeds. So think about those as maps of science. And we organize those feeds around concepts that are derived from papers, preprints as well. These feeds are curated by we have a team of curators. They are created through some of the machine learning tools, and they also can be created by users through the platform, through the Explorer feature in the platform. And they allow us to monitor new developments within a field or within a topic or area of interest, but also surface new concepts or new papers that one may not have known to look for. Underlying Meta is a biomedical knowledge graph where we are linking entities, managing relationships, and understanding those relationships. Right now, the knowledge graph is focused on biomedical research. We process someplace over 4,000 papers a day. We ingest both published literature from biomedical research publications as well as preprints, including the bioarchive. So just a little view into how the information is organized. As I mentioned, we pre-create a number of feeds in different topical areas. We also analyze the papers in those feeds and organize them by factors such as the extent to which they are maybe trending in news, getting cited, getting referenced in the literature through citations, as well as being mentioned in Twitter. And we partner with Altmetric to support some of those metrics. So here's an example of a set of feeds that are trending or that have high impact. We also can organize feeds that are topical and related to particular categories. So one can navigate through a broad set of subject areas and see the subfeeds or the organization of new papers in those areas. And then within each feed, we enable the user to see the most recent papers sorted by time, or navigate and explore, for example, what researchers, what concepts are emerging associated with those. We also indicate what concepts, so for example, in this example, the feed is related to the concept gene expression, and that's highlighted for each of the papers showing up. A user can have any number of feeds across their account, be they feeds that they've followed from our curated set or that they've developed by themselves. Our goal also is to enable seamless access to the papers from here, and we do that through direct linkages, enabling access, not unlike what Larry just described. Where there's open access papers, we link the DOI, and then we also integrate with workflow tools such as Mendeley, so that if somebody wants to manage subsets of their papers. Our goal is not to be a full workflow capability, but to partner with other organizations that are providing those kinds of services. And here's an example of a currently trending feed that we're curating and making available related to the current coronavirus. And I will stop there and turn it over to the next speaker.
Great, thanks so much, Patricia. And now we'll hear from Sean, who's going to talk a little bit about what Cite.ia's AI is doing around categorization of citations. So Sean, let's hear what you have.
Great, thanks for the opportunity to talk about Cite. First, real quick, can everyone see my screen okay?
Can.
Excellent. So my name is Sean Reif, and I'm the Chief Research Officer and co-founder of Cite. And I, along with my co-founders, we founded Cite and launched with VC funding, I guess, in 2018. And we recently received some grants from both the NSF and NIDA, NIH. So we're growing, and it's a really exciting time for us. We're based out of Brooklyn, but we have team members all over the world. So we developed Cite to solve a pretty specific problem, namely, how do you know what other people are saying about a scientific paper? So how do you know if a scientific finding has been replicated? And we think this is an incredibly pressing issue given the astounding number of scientific papers that are published every year. So there's approximately 2.5 million scientific papers coming out every year. And even in my own field of psychology, there are tens of thousands of papers that are published every year. Around 80 to 90% of major preclinical studies can't be verified by the industry. And of course, there's tens of billions spent yearly on irreproducible studies. So we really think this is an important topic in terms of winnowing down the literature. And just some representative quotes from public media outlets there. Half the results published in peer-reviewed scientific journals are probably wrong. That was probably a controversial statement 10, 15 years ago. I think today it's not. And science definitely has a reproducibility problem, and those ramifications are widespread. So we think this is a timely question. And if you've been following the replication crisis, just the fact that in many fields, what were once considered unassailable, well-established findings are now failing to replicate. So we want to make it easier to see if a scientific finding has been independently verified or failed to be verified. And so, kind of with all that information out there, how do we separate the good from the bad, the wheat from the chaff? I actually, on a personal level, can talk about this because this idea of, sort of finding the most important papers, the papers that stand up, that are highly cited and highly robust. This is actually a problem I first encountered when I was a graduate student back in 2006. My master's thesis was on stigma and social support seeking. And of course, that topic encompasses thousands of papers across a lot of different subfields. And the best that I could do at the time was just to write a little script that would query EBSCO and compile a list of papers that were most frequently cited. And then I'd have to go through and evaluate each one of those citing articles manually. And this, to put it mildly, was not an enjoyable experience. So today we have what my co-founders and I have developed, which we call Cite. And Cite uses machine learning to extract and analyze citations from scientific journals. So you can go to cite.ai and you can enter a paper's DOI, and just like there, that's our landing page, or you can search for a paper by author or title, or you can just search for a general topic. You can use it in much the same way a lot of people use Google Scholar, and look for information in that way. Once you click on a particular title, a particular paper, it'll bring you to a Cite report page. And this is what we call a citation report. This provides a list of all the papers which have cited that paper. So the paper that you're looking at the profile for is what we call the target paper. And then all of the citations come from citing papers. So it'll provide you with a snippet of text that surrounds that citation, so it will let you see what those papers are saying about the target paper. And we also use deep learning to classify the text of the citation as supporting, contradicting, or simply mentioning the target article. So with that report, you can easily get a sense of, well, what your field is saying about a given scientific publication, without having to claw your way through hundreds or thousands of different scientific articles. So for example, if you go to the little sidebar there, you'll see a number of different things that are pretty common. There's the year published. You can filter by the section of the paper that a scientific citation occurs in, or by the paper type. But what is sort of unique about Cite is this classification. So you'll notice for this particular paper, our algorithm has identified 53 of the citations as supporting, meaning they're saying, hey, what this target article found, our results were consistent with that. About 1,000 as mentioning, meaning they don't really have any valence to them at all. They're just sort of talking about the article. And 4 of those cites as contradicting, meaning they found things that were inconsistent with the target article. And if you scroll down and just look at some of those citation contexts, you can see these are 2 examples of contradicting citations. So our data linking BRD4 to tumor suppressive program stands in apparent contrast with the established role of BRD4 in tumors as a cancer maintenance gene. And you can see 53 there, that's reference to the target article. And so, there would be, again, 3 more contradicting citations just like that. We do this using machine learning at a couple of different levels. So we use machine learning models to actually extract the citation statement itself. So this is how we get data out of PDFs. They're the source of the majority of our data. And then we also have a deep learning model that classifies citation statements as supporting, contradicting, or mentioning. And this is a model that we're continuing to improve. We're adding new data and adding additional features and tuning it. So we're hoping that the accuracy of the model I say hoping, it is actually getting better all the time. And we're also really proud of our partnerships. We partnered with a number of major aggregators and publishers. So at present, we have nearly 500 million citation statements in our database, and we're ingesting around 100,000 scientific papers every day. So our coverage is increasing as well. That's one of our major goals, is to increase our coverage over the next few months, next year. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on our product. These are just some examples of things we've heard on Twitter. And most importantly, I use it myself. So I'm actually a professor at Murray State University in Kentucky, in addition to my role at Cite. And I've integrated this into my research workflow, and we now routinely, my students in my lab, we routinely cite check papers that are central to our research. So it's for me personally, it's been a really useful tool as well. Quick shout out to all my great colleagues, people who I work with. We're a great team. And between all of us, we have around, I guess, 50 years of either technical and business experience. So just a quick hello to them. And this is where you can get in touch with me, or happy to field any questions on Twitter or on email. So.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Sean. So now we've sort of gotten, three different perspectives that really come at this, content discovery and content sort of investigation process from three different sort of areas of both sort of that initial, very traditional sort of searching for content and then trying to get access to it, to then meta trying to improve the, the way that you actually find out about content and providing some more of a push access to content, and then Sean, who's talking about really trying to understand the citations and really try to get at a way of giving a little bit more detail about content. Why don't we start at the beginning of that process, Laird? And since you guys have actually implemented this, we're starting to see some implementations of seamless access. And what do you think you've learned so far from actually running it in the real world?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think what we've seen in the data so far is that we have been very successful in making the sort of a journey to initiate that federated access experience more visible to users than it used to be on nature.com. So we've seen something like about a 200% increase in the number of users who are initiating the federated access experience. There's obviously an appetite and a need there that wasn't being fulfilled by the previous user experience on the site. However, interestingly, we've seen that the growth in the number of users who are actually completing the experience is much lower. It's a much lower proportion, so it's only about a 30% increase. And the obvious reason for this, I think, is that we only have federated access enabled for about 2,700 institutions, so less than 10% of our institutional customer base. So researchers, well, they can more easily find this option to authenticate off campus now. Many of them are coming to the place where they select their institution, unfortunately finding that their institution hasn't enabled federated access. So I think based on that learning, we've decided that instead of rolling out the seamless access experience to other platforms as the next step, we're going to start to talk more to our customers, librarians about enabling federated access. And when we have talked to them so far, so sometimes some of the concerns that have been raised are, does this mean I lose IP access? And the answer to that is no. They're not mutually exclusive. You can have both authentication methods set up. Some people are worried about privacy concerns, so they express a concern that because in the federated access experience, the institution's identity provider can send back institutional authentication data or individual data, that there's a privacy issue. Although I should say on the Springer Nature end, we never request that data when we call an institutional identity provider, and if anybody ever does send that data to us, we just ignore it and throw it away. We're just using this for institutional authentication. I think most other publishers are the same, and it's fully within the control of the library what information they release to a service provider like Springer Nature and the response that they send back. So it's really something that's fully under the control of the institution. And then sometimes there'll be concerns about working with IT departments at institutions to get this sort of enabled and set up. Although sometimes that's very easy, through federations, the technical part of the, like in Common in the US, for example, the technical part of the setup, the metadata exchange is already in place. And really all that needs to be done is for the institution to ask the publisher to enable the method for their users. So we're hoping that more people might be interested in enabling this and sort of spreading the benefit of the experience to their users. And we're looking at doing that as a next step.
Cool. And Patricia, it struck me that, Meta represents a change to people's traditional sort of research workflows. They actually have to come and either set up their feeds at Meta or find out about it in some way. So I just wondered, what are you doing as an organization to try to get yourself inserted into researchers' workflows?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of things. One is, with a feed, a topical feed, whether it's building off of one that we've curated through the system, or that an individual has created. Researchers are sharing those. So for example, within a lab, they may share a feed, and then each person individually can receive those updates via their email digest, or dynamically. It's constantly updating in the system itself. I mentioned, in terms of workflows, our goal is to really focus on kind of organizing that information and making sure that it's bringing in new concepts and bringing in new papers as quickly as possible in terms of the feed, and also bringing in concepts or papers that may not necessarily be part of somebody's traditional search alert string, for example. And then in terms of workflow, kind of getting to the full text or managing the papers, really sort of driving through integrations and partnerships with other organizations to support that.
Yeah, and Sean, similar question to you, because it sounded like the way you were talking about it, it's almost become sort of a new step in your process, where checking the citation record is an important aspect of what you and your students are doing. And how do you see that? How are you trying to promote that?
Yeah, so we're really thinking going forward that we want Cite to be a service that people can use through in multiple ways. So, for example, I didn't really mention it, but we have a browser plugin that just sort of hangs out on the right side of your web browser, and that I find actually is the way I usually use the platform the most. It just sits there, and when it sees that you're looking at the page for a scientific article, you can click on it. It'll show you how many different types of citations we have in our database to that paper, and you can click on it and it'll bring you to the Cite report page for that. But you can also, like I said, you can actually do searches within our system itself. And we're also interested, obviously, in pursuing relationships with publishers and with aggregators, so that you can see a little link to our citation report. There's a badge on the side of the report page, and you can click on that, and that will take you to the Cite report. So we view ourselves as really something that you can get through with multiple streams, and we're looking for integrations in as many places as possible. We want to sort of reach out and be something that is easy to use, rather than necessarily having to be the destination that people go to. We want to provide that service, but we can work in multiple ways. So.
Yep. And Laird, you touched on this a little bit in your answer to my first question, but I just wanted to dive into this a little bit. I know that one of the pushbacks have been, with seamless access, has been the privacy concerns from librarians. But it did seem like what you were saying is that is really entirely under their control. And I just wanted if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So the way the federated access mechanism works is, when a user comes to a publisher site and they select their institution, or they tell the publisher site what institution they're a member of, then as part of that journey, then we basically send a message to the institution's identity provider, which sort of manages the institution's identity. It's the sign-on credentials that the user uses to sign into any kind of their sort of institutional services. we send a message over that says, "Hi, we've got this user. Can you confirm to us that they're actually a member of the institution?" And in that message, we can ask to say, and also please give us details about who this person is at an individual level. And the institutional identity provider can then send back that data about the user at an institutional level. But it is what the institutional identity provider sends back is up to them. They can decline that to release that request. They can also if they do, they can let the user know that they're going to release that data and allow them to consent. I should make clear that on the Springer Nature end, we're only using this for institutional authentication. We don't request any individual data. And again, if anybody has their identity provider configured to send any back, then we just sort of ignore and throw that away. I think there is a more complicated sort of aspect to this that has to do with sort of attribute release and sort of the standards around attribute release. And there's a working group to try and sort of address some of those concerns. But it is the case, at least from the Springer Nature end, that we I can assure that we're just using this for institutional authentication. The release of personal data from the institutional identity provider is configurable on the institution's side. And again, the current state is that if anybody does send us that data, we just throw it away. And I think really the drive of seamless access is to ease institutional authentication and try so I think I understand the concern because the mechanism can facilitate that, but that's not what it's being used for in this case. And again, all of that data release is under the institution's control.
Yeah, that seems sort of key to me, that they have control over that. And is it, in fact, I mean, it technically from the librarian's point of view, it's not different than anything they're doing currently to set up Shibboleth or Open Athens?
No, exactly the same. Yeah, so it's the same federated access method. So if you have what's sometimes referred to either as Shibboleth or Open Athens, then it's just enabling that, and we just happen to have the seamless access experience of that authentication method enabled on our site, as the ACS does now as well, and as other publishers will probably implement in future. So it really is just it's just a new user experience, an eased user experience over that existing authentication method. The old, as I said, the old user experience was often confusing to users. There were different calls to action to initiate it. You have to go through it over and over again on each publisher's site. So the aim is really just to make the experience of this method easier for users, so that when they're outside of their institutional network, they can more easily get to the content.
Yeah. And Patricia, in your talk, by the way, I'm just going to stop and for our audience, please, if you have questions, do put them in the question box. I'm happy to ask questions. I can ask questions all day, but if you have things that you want to get answers on, please do type in. But Patricia, one of the things that struck me in your presentation was that Meta includes a large number of researchers that on staff, and that curation seems to be an important aspect of what you're doing. And that was sort of it struck me just because that seems to be running counter to a lot of the sort of AI kinds of info that's been promulgated in the last couple of years. And I just wondered, if you could talk about that. Why is that a key part of what how Meta is organized and the service?
Yeah, I would just say we don't have a large number of curators, but we see kind of three aspects to building a feed that enables somebody to either learn a new field, or get up to speed on a field, or to keep up to date with the field or the domain or the area of interest to them. So the first aspect is I just call it sort of the automated AI model. So that's analyzing clustering papers and creating these feeds around certain topics, and we're kind of doing that at scale. The second is the ability to kind of create your feed or edit one of those feeds and manage your, kind of your research interest. And then the third is can kind of be a combination of the two in a way, but for certain topic areas, those categories that I showed, and then the subcategories within them, we start with the automated feed, but then we go through and have domain experts or people review to say, yeah, this is a representation of this field or of this topic. So it just gives an additional layer of validity, if you will, over and above the kind of the scaled automated approach. And for those feeds, in some cases, we've partnered with scientific societies who make them available to their research community. Sometimes that's been around or in conjunction with an academic meeting, for example, or just as a mechanism for an organization to keep up to date. You'll see in that Discover panel, you'll see some of those feeds that actually have like a society's name associated with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Sean, one of the things that struck me, one of the things I like about Cite is just the simplicity of the categorization mechanism. It's so, as soon as you sort of look at it, it seems so obvious that it's a good thing to do. But it also struck me that it would be so easy for authors to start doing that in terms of the way current articles are formatted, and the way the citations in current articles are presented. Do you think that Cite will have an effect that way, or are there reasons why you're having actual software doing this is potentially better, or that there will be society, there might be reasons why people wouldn't start to take on this within their own the way they structure their own articles.
Yeah, no, so this is actually something that we've been thinking a lot about from moment one. I think, so I guess there are a few different questions sort of bound up in that, and I'll try to answer each one. And if I don't answer your question, feel free to correct me and point me in the right direction. I think that, this is one of the things that is simply not possible to do by hand. The amount of data that is necessary to label, you just have to, it's a situation where you either have to do it using AI or you have to not do it at all. Now, we do have a number of feedback mechanisms that are designed to guard against miscategorization. So, for example, when you pull up a Cite report, when you look at each citation statement, you can go through there and actually there's a little flag that you can click on. You can just flag a citation statement as miscategorized. So you can tell us, hey, this is wrong, and we'll go in there and fix it. And then we use those data actually to improve our model. So the idea is that there is that feedback mechanism. And so the model, the more people interact with it, the better it will get, and the more accurately it will classify those citation statements. I think the other thing that is sort of bound up in there is the idea that people could, in a sense, sort of game the system through self-citations, for example. So if I know that people are going to be looking at a Cite report for my paper, I as a researcher could go in there and make sure that I cite myself many times in a relatively positive manner. And that's actually one of the research projects that I've taken on over the past, I guess, 6 months, has been to develop a system of identifying self-citations and then analyzing the ways in which people cite themselves. So that is a feature that actually we're looking at deploying, where it will actually identify self-citations so that it'll be obvious when that's happening. And then at some point, maybe even figuring out a way of weighting our model using that piece of information. So, you know, obviously we do hope that this does have some downstream effects in terms of the way people think about how literature in their area is going to be read. And we'll be taking steps to guard against that sort of gaming of the system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And took it in new ways that I hadn't quite thought about. But it also sort of got at something else, which was I was wondering how you monitor the efficacy of your algorithms, and having that ability for you end users to point out when things have been miscategorized and then feed that back in seems like a feedback loop that is really important for this kind of effort.
Yeah, so we, I mean, we employ very, you know, standard machine learning practices in terms of ensuring that our model is behaving itself. So we have a holdout set that we're constantly testing against, and like I said, really the key here, I think, is the point that you made, is that we're continuing to add to our data set. And you know, if you look at a graph in terms of just overall accuracy of our model, we can see it still hasn't plateaued. So there's still some gains that can be made from adding more data to our model. And I anticipate over the next year, we're going to see some additional gains in terms of model accuracy. So it's an iterative process with any type of machine learning endeavor. You always have, you know, you learn as you go. So.
Yeah. And similarly for you, Patricia, what's the mechanism for figuring out how effective your feeds are? Do you have a way of monitoring usage in such a way that you can tell, you know, that you're providing really effective results to people?
Yes, and similar to what Sean just described in the cite model, that goes across monitoring usage and use within the feed. Two, as I mentioned, is some of the manual or expert reviews that we do within feeds, and then the third is constantly monitoring the models and the concept identification tools in particular. We are testing right now a feedback mechanism and a feedback loop that sounds similar to what Sean just described, for feedback kind of at the individual paper level or even within the concept level, and that in turn will feed back into the overall clustering models.
Right.
I mean, I see this you know, this area as kind of it's evolving, and we're all kind of learning right now. But I do see a continual combination of developing the models, having, you know, user or kind of at some point some feedback mechanisms that inform those models, and that combination continuing.
Yeah. And for both of you, since you're both using AI tools, and it's, you know, it's always an issue, do you have concerns around bias in these models in terms of just the way they're reflecting results across the literature? That was really directed at either Patricia or Sean.
I mean, I think the bias, you know, maybe we could sort of explicate that a little bit more. I think one area that we tend to and pay attention to is within the kind of the organization of the papers within a feed, and you know, we don't just look at citations, for example, as the only way to rank or to prioritize the display of a paper. We're using both an array of indicators and metrics that we do as we're processing the papers, and then, as I mentioned, we also utilize some of the data from Altmetric. So that's certainly something that we're paying attention to. Then, as it comes to looking at identification of concepts, I think there's a whole lot of interesting work ahead of us in terms of really being able to identify and validate kind of the emerging topics over and above what's considered a core.
Right. Yeah, that's a question that's come in from the audience is what your approach is on topic identification and how you see that evolving.
Yeah, so we use some probabilistic models, and we do, as I mentioned, clustering of papers, and then we also utilize ontologies and tools such as Mesh and UMLS, and we have work ongoing right now with looking at some more domain-specific ontologies to help identify or validate topics, as well as to identify or signal new entities or new concepts that haven't heretofore made it into such ontologies.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, Sean, just to circle back on that bias question, it's kind of clear how Meta, because of the organization and presentation of results, could lead to bias questions. I just wondered if you, in the site example, whether or not bias is as much of an issue. Is there, potentially confounding issues around how things get categorized, or I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out whether or not I can see. There always are bias concerns, but I just wondered how you guys whether or not you guys have grappled with that at all.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I mean, it's the kind of thing where it's sort of a garbage in, garbage out kind of situation. So we've made sure that we've trained our model using, just in simple terms, using a large number of annotators. So people who train the model will actually go in and we'll show them a scientific citation and say, how would you categorize this as confirming, mentioning, or support, or contradicting? And the people who are doing those annotations, we're constantly evaluating how they're scoring things, and we're doing inter-rater reliability checks. So I think really the diversity of people who are doing the annotations, who are actually training the model, for us is what's key in terms of guarding against that kind of bias.
Yeah, yeah. And Laird, I just wanted to circle back because I just wanted to get at the difference between seamless access and GetFTR, because I know when I read the initial reports, it wasn't quite clear to me, but it became much clearer in your presentation. And so it seems like GetFTR is really aimed at third-party sites who are displaying citations and being able to show whether or not users have access to the full text. Where is GetFTR in terms of signing up partners for that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes, I can answer. Yes, I can split that into two questions. So yes, absolutely. I'm glad it's the difference is clarified. In terms of the so during this beta phase of the first half of the year with GetFTR, we've had interest expressed from, I think, 300 different sort of organizations now in making use of the GetFTR services, and in some cases those will be what we call integrators. So those would be discovery services like PubMed, or scholarly collaboration networks like Mendeley, for example, or publishers. There are 5 publishers participating to begin with: Springer Nature, Elsevier, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, and the ACS. So currently 5 publishers participating. We're in discussions with some more. We've just in the last month or so started to have our first couple of integrators make use of the GetFTR API to introduce experiences on their sites, to really just to start to test out whether those experiences test out the user experience of using the GetFTR API and the technical infrastructure, so doing it in a very low level way. And so Mendeley's rolled out an experience on their site on the article abstract pages that makes use of the GetFTR API, and Digital Science has rolled it out across a few different products. I think it's on Figshare, Dimensions, and Symplectic at the moment. So, and we're speaking with, so I think there are probably three other integrators at the moment that we're speaking closely with, and might roll out experiences sometime in the near future, so over the coming month or so. And really, again, this beta period is just to try and figure out use cases for the services and understand good user experiences for the services. So I think probably by the end of the beta period, hopefully we'll have at least 5, 6, hopefully more, maybe even stretching into double-digit integrators making use of this, and really figure out all the different use cases for the services and a good user experience for them across different sites. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Be looking forward to that. I see that it's at the top of the hour, and so it's time for us to let people go. So Jeff, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Tom and Patricia, Sean and Laird for an engaging discussion today. Thanks to our sponsor today, Adapon, as well, and thank all of you for attending. Once again, please do take time to respond to the webinar evaluation that you'll receive in your email. Your feedback will help us to continually improve the webinars program. Please join us for the next SSP webinar, a Scholarly Kitchen webinar entitled Building a Sustainable Research Infrastructure, What Comes Next? That'll be on Tuesday, April 21st. And with that, we are concluded. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.